right, I think we'll go ahead and get started here. So welcome to VMworld 2014. So the keynote started with an interpretive dance, and we were going to do that, but the stage isn't quite big enough for all of us to dance at the same time. So I suppose we could do like Irish dance or something where you keep your arms in. But anyway, we're gonna talk a little bit about VMware IT and some of the experiences we've had delivering IT as a service. And I'm not sure what we might say that requires a disclaimer, but here's the standard disclaimer slide. So VMware IT is very much like your organization. You know, we have 300 business applications that we support. Some of them are custom, some of them are packaged. Increasingly, we're using SaaS applications. We've got global operations. We've got data centers around the world. So we face a lot of the same challenges that you do as an IT organization that supports our business. But in some ways, we're a little different. Pat talked about extreme dog fooding. It's one of our CIO's top 5 initiatives for the year is to aggressively, deploy early versions of products and push the products hard. We have direct access to our product experts within VMware, so a lot of the things that our IT organization does tends to kind of push around the edges of what the products can do, and then we give that feedback directly to our developers. So that's a little bit different than your organizations. But today we're gonna talk through with 4 folks. My name's Kurt Milne. I'm with the marketing organization. I've had the opportunity in the last year to spend time with their IT organization to figure out, some of the things that we're doing with our own products. And I'm gonna ask folks to introduce themselves, but we've got 2 folks that are what I'd say are on the delivery side. So as we deliver IT as a service, we have a couple folks that are on the consumer side. So the parts of IT in the organization that now consume IT as a service. So we'll have a pretty good perspective there. And we're gonna talk about what we're doing, what's changed because of our IT as a service strategy, what are some of the challenges and key dependencies that you might want to think about as you pursue an IT as a service strategy. And then we're going to open it up to questions so you can ask for the unvarnished truth here. So we're not sales folks, we're not product developers, we're the folks that, like you, use these products, and so we're here to share. So let's talk about, what is IT as a service. So, IT as a service is kind of one of those terms where it's like a mission statement. You get a bunch of people together to write it up, and then at the end, it's hard to figure out what it actually means. We've had software as a service for 15 years, right? Hotmail started about 15 years ago. Infrastructure as a service, platform as a service are terms that NIST helped kind of normalize across the industry. We've got the IT service management folks that have talked about delivering IT as a service for 10 years now. Then all of a sudden, people started piling on with terms like business process as a service, everything as a service, IT as a service, and what I called WAAS, or whatever as a service, right? It's like, what is this thing? So what I'm going to ask each of you to do is just introduce yourself, a little bit about your role, and then what does IT as a service mean to you personally in your role? So Joe, why don't you start?
Okay, my name is Joe Simon. I'm actually responsible for IT architecture and strategy at VMware. And I think it's an important thing that you're bringing up as to what exactly is IT as a service as a phenomena. I think that as an organization, our CIOs put us on a path to try and define and reorganize ourselves to provide services to the organization. But the idea would be to try and run IT as a business. And if you're going to run it as a business or a service business, then each service has to be identified, each has to be defined, it has to be measured, and it needs to perform to predefined SLAs. And more importantly, it has to be costed out so that as a customer within the company, what is that service going to cost us, and is it going to live up to the expectations, etc. It also provides internal customer a chance to look at that cost and the overall service and decide if that's the thing that they want to get out of that organization, like in IT in this case, or go somewhere else for that same service. Now again, you have to make sure that they are comparing apples to apples and not apples to oranges. If you can do that, then that would be a very transparent way to run IT. So that's what IT as a service means to me, or to our organization. And we are certainly on the journey to try and get there and define the services, define the catalogs, et cetera. So we are certainly not done with it, but we're very much in journey to do that.
Anis, what about you?
Great. So I'm Anis Iqbal. I run the customer-facing component of an infrastructure service offering for our internal organization as a company. For me, it's very much the same thing that Job had just said, with the emphasis that you have the notion that your lines of businesses or your customers inside your organization really have other options, right? There's so many other as-a-services out there that are continuing to market to your pure demographic that forces you to innovate and look at how can I better meet, or how can I better understand so I can better meet the customer inside our organization, and really treating them as a true consumer as opposed to just an employee of your organization. They have to consume you. It's a fundamental shift here.
And Venkat?
Sure. My name is Venkat Gopalakrishnan. I work for VMware IT. And you heard about extreme dogfooding this morning, and part of my role is to run some of those dogfooding projects within IT. To me, what does IT as a service mean? What is happening today is most of the IT organizations end up being order takers. One of the reasons being IT resources are spending more and more time in managing and servicing existing infrastructure, and they don't have time to do value-added work. So what it means to me is, when we go into IT as a service, is three things. One is enable self-service, which means push a lot of the functionality and the power to the business users. Second is automation. Automation like crazy. Whatever you are doing manually, look for opportunities to automate. The third is look at SaaS vendors to do or to take care of some of the functionality and the infrastructure services that you normally provide. That way, IT users are not managing and servicing existing infrastructure that is now somebody else's business. So the bottom line is, for me, when IT as a service is implemented, the phone in the IT department should never ring.
Okay, that's interesting. Brian, is your phone quiet?
Well, so my name is Brian Smith, and I'm the infrastructure director. So I am like your IT guys, or potentially like you, where I've got to build all the infrastructure behind and manage all the infrastructure behind all these services that these gentlemen want to run. So it's quite a fun experience trying to deliver all of that at scale with dedicated performance and reliability. And what does IT as a service mean to me? It's really about delivering that content to the user. So, any kind of, like, we work on the hands-on labs, and so you really don't care when you're taking the hands-on lab what's behind it. You just want that lab experience to be smooth and to get a lot of value out of what you're experiencing.
Yeah, so that's a good example of a specific service. So another perspective, is kind of talking about why we're pursuing this kind of approach. This is actually a slide that our CFO presented when he keynoted a financial conference. And it's basically, he said, we're going to try to double the size of our company, and we don't want to double the size of our IT budget. So instead of growing IT budget at parity with revenue, we want to actually grow that less. But at the same time, we want to spend more on innovation and supporting that top line growth, and less on the keep the lights on kinds of activities within IT. So I'm sure all of you got this kind of perspective from your company as well. So we call that really that IT as a service opportunity is supporting the business with innovation, but spending less on the keep the lights on kind of activity. So Job, how have we implemented our IT as a service strategy? We've talked about kind of what it means from different perspectives, but what's been kind of the history and some of the things we've done specifically to deliver IT as a service? So get a little more specific here.
Now, I think that some of the services that we have envisioned and implemented are something that have a history. So one of the ones, obviously, we started with was to offer our virtualized environment as a service, or infrastructure service, that thing that Brian talked about. So that was one of the first things. We call that OneCloud, as fundamentally an internal ability to service our internal customer and they sit on the service as a tenant and to obviously get the right level of service for being that, like hands-on labs. Now, the same way, we are also in the process of doing the same thing across multiple services within IT. But in addition to doing all that, we also need to build the catalogs, and we need to build the basic infrastructure to even provide the service. So when you say self-service, to, for example, provision a new user that's coming on board, or a new employee, or a new contractor, these are all basic services that should be done in an automated fashion. And we are actually trying to make sure that those catalogs are there for the users to see. And the more we can get it automated, the more we can actually provide it as a service and self-service, the better off we are as an organization. But behind that, we also have to make sure that we can live up to the SLAs that is expected, we can live up to the cost structures as expected, and provide the service to the customer as transparently as possible. And clearly there's more work to do, but it's something that we are in the process of doing.
Yep. So the way, the story I heard was that, we're a software vendor, we make cloud software, and when we came out with our cloud software a few years ago, a lot of different folks within the company stood up their own private cloud. So global services support had their clouds, multiple clouds. There were the sales folks wanted to stand up demo environments. I mean, we kind of had clouds popping up like mushrooms. And Paul Moritz at the time said, hey, we need one cloud. We don't get economies of scale with all of these small clouds. I mean, Anish, did we have a business case for our private cloud, or what, how do we justify it?
Yeah, so as you said, it was mushrooms sprouting up all over the place because we're unique in the sense that we don't have to pay for our software inside our company. And so you can imagine that when you got free software and people have labs all over a company of our size, they just start sprouting up all kinds of stuff. And ultimately we had two challenges. So one, the CFO was like, I'm tired of everybody coming at me and asking for $1 million here or hundreds of thousands of dollars there for this new lab component or something for their little mini cloud. And then we had the other issue where clouds start falling over on people's selves because it takes dedicated effort, knowledge, and know-how in order to keep it running on a consistent basis. And typically, the cloud is making it easier for people to consume their stuff, and usually they can't keep ahead of the curve. And so it starts falling over on itself and takes dedicated staff and resources to even keep it going and meeting their own business needs. And that's ultimately what drove the whole premise of one cloud, and that's why we call it one cloud, which is take all the mini clouds throughout all the company, aggregate it in one capital umbrella, and come up with a far better operating model as well to be far more efficient and be able to offer better services to people that need to consume it. That was our journey.
Yeah. So we have people in global service and support that are product experts, obviously, because they're taking calls for these products. But it wasn't their day job to administer and run a cloud. So I think it's a,
Right.
What's your core competency kind of thing.
And how many times has an IT person stood up a proof of concept server and then you get a call at 2 a.m. because it's now business critical and they've linked to it from the public website, right? And that's one of our big challenges, and that's one of the things we wanted to fix, was having a centralized support team that had centralized information and knowledge sharing to repair that at any given hour of the day with a global team.
So Brian, you run our private cloud now, our one cloud. I mean, in your terms, what business problem are you solving?
Well, I think there's a lot of different business problems. I see a lot of value with R&D, because when R&D has 14 little clouds that they get support calls from, that's good to find a lot of little bugs or nuances, but you don't find those scale bugs. You don't find those churn bugs. You don't have really expert staff you're talking to. They're usually a business owner who's worried about supporting GSS or supporting hands-on labs. They're not really seeing the full picture because that's not their full-time job. It's just something they built on the side and they pray it keeps running. Yeah. So a lot of economies having to do with centralized operations. We can hire storage experts, networking experts. We can be ahead of the curve on things like NSX and vSAN. So that enables us to do that because it is our full-time job.
Well, so let me just show you a picture here. So this is a slide we presented last year at VMworld when we talked about our private cloud deployment. So, basically we've been at it about 3 years. In the first year we had about 10,000 VMs in our private cloud and a couple of tenants. And then demand was driven by, basically word got out that this was a really easy model. It was easy to, you didn't have to have a server under your desk. You could click a button, get a server when you need it, and then turn it off when you don't need it. And that started to change behavior. We got more tenants on board. And then we thought that by the end of 2014, we were going to have about 90,000 virtual machines in our private cloud. So here we are about the end of 2014. Brian, you want to tell us what actually happened?
Well, so the plan was to be at 100,000 by the end of the year. You said 90, but we were hoping to get to 100. The actual is that we passed that mark in Q1. So we had to set our bar a bit higher. So we actually are projecting 200,000 by the end of the year as our growth estimate.
And we can be one of the reasons for that. So like my team, IT operations, applications, we're all customers to Anis and Brian's organization, and when things become more efficient, the demand within IT and its users increases. So back before about 2 years ago, we were managing about 15 instances of non-production applications. Today, when they automated the infrastructure side, that has grown up to 25. So the workloads have increased, and that is part of the reason where they overshot their goals.
Yeah. So Anis, you're responsible for tenant onboarding. Your team has the relationship with all of the different groups within VMware that consume these cloud services. What kind of things are people putting in our private cloud? What's the customer demand look like?
Yeah, so I would say that so for our ability to sell our software to all of you, we have to demonstrate that to you. We have to let you play with that. And so you have things like hands-on labs that are run actually out of the OneCloud infrastructure. You have things that, if you have an SE coming to your site to go and show you the value that we can represent for your company, that's done all on this platform. So it gives people an on-demand infrastructure that allows them to easily go and do the thing that they're providing value of. For an SE, that's selling our software. For our global support organization, so when you have a problem with our software, you make a phone call, and the other person on the other end of the line is trying to duplicate what you're saying. They use our OneCloud environment to very quickly, on demand, duplicate your scenario so that they can then go and try to solve your problem. But those are two distinct use cases in particular, in addition to what everything else is driven out of IT as well.
So it's basically, if you look at IT or what VMware does as a company, our whole value chain, from sales and marketing to product development to support to training, all of those different business functions are moving or have moved a lot of their work onto the private cloud. So Brian, you run the cloud going from, and this is actually two, virtual machine units. It's a little different than virtual machines. Maybe you can explain what that is, and then, going double what you thought was going to come into your data center. I mean, that didn't require you to change anything, did it? Being a little sarcastic there.
Yeah, didn't. But no, so when we talk about VM units, it's a capacity unit. So any given time, there might be half that many VMs powered on. So I don't want to mislead anyone to think that. Because as you know, especially with hands-on labs, you've got VMs that require 8 gigabytes of memory, other VMs that require 2 gigabytes or 32 gigabytes of memory. So at any given time, you may have very few large VMs turned on, or very many tiny VMs turned on. So we just represent it as an average. So that's how we come up with that nomenclature. But the challenges are countless, right? So we've had to change our culture from a very Silicon Valley-based company to a global-based company. So we've got new teams and data centers in EMEA and in Asia, and we're really expanding to be that global team. There's just countless challenges, right? Between you don't know how much you're going to purchase ahead of time because you don't know how much your customers are going to like what you build. It turns out they're probably going to like it a lot. So it's countless challenges all around the board, but it's fun, and I think we're really pushing the products to their limits and beyond those limits. The big sign today said, no limits. That's how our approach is with R&D. R&D may say this is the minimum and maximum guide, and this is the maximum you can set this setting to. Well, we push right past that in a lot of cases, unless it's a hard limit. And the fun part is we get to work with R&D and then help them increase that limit, because maybe there's a parameter for memory that needs to be increased or some other setting, and then hopefully by the next time we release product to you, you've actually got a higher limit there. So.
And let me add one more thing to that. So, one of the other challenges that we had is, as we've been ramping up to these numbers, it was just rationalization of what our service offerings are and are, right? Because you have some idea of what it is. You start throwing up capacity, people start consuming it. You don't know how they were doing it kind of prior to delivering the service. And then where we are at in this 2 to 3 year kind of venture is now rationalizing what people are actually using it, how they're using it, and start profiling that and taking that and defining more services around those type of profiles, where we didn't do a whole lot of that as we're just ramping up. And, you know, Brian really struggling to just keep up with those numbers and try to stay ahead of the demand curve. But that's where we are now, and so that you can better align customer needs to the services that we're offering, and kind of that's the rationalization that we're also.
So we had multiple data centers before. We have multiple data centers now. We had lots of racks full of equipment, a lot of B blocks and other. I assume we still have those. I mean, so what changed for you running the infrastructure, delivering infrastructure as a service? Did you reorg? Are you breaking down silos? Do you have new skills, or is it just kind of same, but now the bill goes to somebody else?
Well, I think there's a lot of changes, right? So a lot of people in Job's organization, being one of our bigger and original tenants, is they're in the extreme dogfooding with Tony, and they really believe in the process, because we're running pretty much all pre-GA software. But as we do that, we take away their ability to log into the storage array, their ability to log in as a root password into the ESX host. And it's a big change, because they're used to shortcutting a lot of things. They'll jump on an ESX host and run top and get different data. And now we're saying, no, you don't have that password. So there's a big cultural shift when you go to a cloud. Basically, we're like a service provider inside of the company, and we wouldn't give them that access because they don't need it to do their job anymore. Because again, now they're focusing on their applications and how they work. And if they have a performance question or whatever, they talk to us. But your specific question was about organization, and it's a lot of challenges, right? Because as a global organization, we have essentially 3 full-scale size teams in the world for OneCloud, in the US and in EMEA and in Asia, and those teams operate pretty independently. But at the same time, we all have to coordinate on every effort. And it's the same thing with, I know Job's team, they and Venkat's team, they are deploying new instances any given point of the day or night. And they want us to give the same consistent, result each time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I also want to add one more thing to that. I think as a customer, of what Brian and Anis offer, from our perspective, we're looking at it as we moved all our DevOps environment into OneCloud, so that we exclusively operate on OneCloud. Now, what we're also looking at is vCloud Air. So that's another service that's a standard offering from VMware, and we looked at that as an extension, a natural extension of our OneCloud private cloud environment. So we now are in the process of moving some dev environments into vCloud Air, which is a hybrid environment. And that's, again, another option. So that's another service that's being offered. So we have, a DevOps there. Our production still is running in our production data center. But yesterday, I actually showed a slide to the TAM conference where we showed how all these things are starting to move towards our combination of private cloud and hybrid cloud environments. So in the long run, I know that today Pat just made a statement saying our SAP environment is going to be on vCloud Air.
So now we know what you're going to be working on for the next 6 months, right?
So I'm sure that's going to be my project. But I think what I'm trying to say is that it becomes another offering that we should tap into naturally. Not just us, but so can you. I mean, there's no reason for you to look at private cloud and hybrid cloud as some exclusive thing where one is mutually exclusive, but they're not. They're actually extensions of one over the other, and you can move things back and forth. I'll give you an example. We're in the process of rolling out our Exchange environment, which is our email messaging environment, and the way we're going to install it and set it up inside the company is we're going to have part of it running in Microsoft O365, part of it running internally in our private cloud, part of it running in our hybrid cloud environment. So the reason we're doing that is partly because we have VMware, we want to showcase it, but partly it's a way to prove that in your own company you can make those choices. You can make those choices of running things across multiple environments, as long as, of course, you live within the laws of physics and you can stick with the latencies and things of that nature. But if you can do that, then you can actually have the best of both worlds of being able to operate in multiple cloud environments. And the big advantage is that if you're on VMware technology, it's consistent technology. So you're monitoring your performance, your measurements activities that you're doing, your scaling activities, and your movement of VMs back and forth are all automatically covered by our technology.
So there's a marketing term, kind of service broker, whereas the organization, you kind of look at the different business demands and figure out, should this go on-prem, should it be SaaS, should it go in a hybrid cloud?
Exactly.
I mean, you as kind of the chief architect for the company, what's your kind of train of thought or the considerations as you think about, where should it go in our data center, our private cloud, and our hybrid cloud service? Again, we're a little unique because hybrid cloud services of VMware offering, but what's your rationale for how you kind of go through that service broker train of thought?
No, I think that eventually, from an application perspective, we make that call all the time, right? So we have to make the call. First of all, is it a SaaS offering that we're going to do with certain integrations internally to applications? And then in addition to that, what part of your on-premise you want to run on literally on-premise, running on your private cloud versus part of it running in a hybrid cloud environment like vCloud Air. I think that rationalization of that happens on a regular basis. It's done through our architecture governance process, whereas as we take on projects, we make that call. And a lot of times, the answers are not that straightforward.
Yep.
And also I think in the past, the natural way for us to look at the hybrid cloud as an opportunity was not there. I mean, it's a relatively new offering. And so as we start getting and maturing in that space, then clearly we're going to start doing more and more and thinking about that a rational way, saying you now have to make a call. Is it you're going to go with SaaS, and if you're going to go with internal private cloud, or you're going to go with a hybrid cloud environment?
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be mutually exclusive either. You can choose and find the right combination that works for you.
Okay.
Well, and I think with our company, we do have that unique situation, and I've been asked several times, why do we have both? Why do we have a private cloud if we're running the public cloud, right? And I think the big motivation is really two things. One, we want to be the best representation of what we expect you to be,
Yeah.
right? So we want to be just like you. We don't want to be totally different, and then we get feedback and it's not relevant, right? And the other thing is that we do a lot of very early dog fooding because we can take more risks, because my customers, if they're down, it's bad, but it's not as bad as VCHS being down. So we can go a little riskier than they can.
So if you use beta product and it doesn't work, you don't get fired.
So for us, it doesn't matter which path you take, whether private cloud or hybrid cloud service. We collaborate, the operations team, applications team, developers, we collaborate, to make sure there is automation in place, things get deployed in an automated fashion, whichever path we take when we actually initiate the project.
Yep.
So all these put together get us to where we need to be as a IT as a service organization.
And I would say internally to the company, we're no different than you, right? We have all these different options, and there's a lot of education that goes on internally around people exploring what option is right for me inside. So I meet with different customers. Our VMware Air group meets with certain customers internally, and we try to figure out, well, what's the right fit for me? What's the pros and cons of each of the services? And we make those decisions internally very much like most enterprises are.
Yeah.
So this all represents change. Another interesting thing to think about, and I'm kind of a student of data center operations. I've been in an analyst role and in a practitioner role and looked at ITIL and kind of the evolution of how we do things. This is really interesting to me. The way we basically got this set up is, Brian is responsible for infrastructure operations. Anise is responsible for what we call tenant operations, actually managing the relationship with all the different tenants. And then Venkat, as one of those tenants, still has operational responsibility. You don't completely give up your responsibility when you go put your workloads in a cloud. And then Job is overhead and he goes to meetings, right?
Pure overhead.
Yeah. So I don't know if you could just kind of talk a little bit about, when we were in this kind of cloud model, maybe a niche start, tenant ops, that's kind of something that I haven't heard people talk about. And I know as VMware, we're still figuring this out as we go. But, what is tenant ops and how is that different than what we had before?
Yeah, sure. So that was really part of our kind of cloud operating model, right? So as we created this infrastructure as a service, people needed to understand how to use it, right? It's capacity at the end of the day. And so what we realized is that, most lines of business, they don't understand cloud, they don't understand capacity, they don't know anything about that, but they know what they consume, right? So we're simply an enabling technology, if you will. And so as you moved into this whole operational paradigm, people needed to shift away. This is the organizational shift. You have to shift away from servers, physical components, moving up the food chain to aligning what it is that people need to consume. And that's really what cloud tenant operations is all about. It's really that alignment to business need on whatever that is, X servers that do Y, right? It's not necessarily, the gigabytes or the storage or the memory or any of that. It's really the software applications that are running within that you need to become an expert on. And so for cloud tenant operations, for us, we got the whole gambit of different type of customers inside of our organization. So we go from people like IT that are very self-sufficient, understand exactly what they need, how to do it, and we're simply a vendor to them offering a set of core things that they don't need to worry about anymore, but they still represent the value chain, the customer relationship, how do I unlock value? And then you have organizations like the field for us is like our professional services, our sales engineers, and those type of people that are busy doing what they do, and they don't have anybody inside that can go manage capacity or a cloud or the demos in which they run at your guys' premises. So we do full service for them. We kind of manage their entire cloud and whatever they need. So it really spans the whole gambit, depending on the type of customer that we're interfacing with internally to our organization.
Yeah. And so in Venkat, as a person responsible for operations of what's running in that cloud, what do you have to? What does your team have to do?
So our lives have actually transformed. You know, when earlier we used to procure, manage, maintain hardware. That entire thing has now shifted as we are buying infrastructure as a service from our internal, if I may say, vendors, right? So when a demand comes in from the business group, I need these applications stood up, or a developer might say, I need a workload, you know, spun up by tomorrow or next week for my new proof of concept, right? So at that time, we are not looking at procuring or, you know, doing a spec of the hardware. We go to these internal, private cloud, and then consume that as a service. They have standard catalogs, right? So we can pick and choose what kind of infrastructure we need. So there's a whole shift in the way we operate as we went into private cloud. That's the huge transformation that has happened in the past year and a half for us.
That's interesting. So maybe just thinking about going forward, Joe, kind of what's next for IT and what's the next step as you push the envelope on this IT as a service, other than your SAP project?
So I think that the direction we're going in is, one is we're building the service catalog out across all the offerings that we want to offer our customers. In some cases, we are brokers as opposed to providing the service ourselves. We've become a conduit to, for example, OneCloud. The intention is that we are organizing ourselves around service, so service management, and having a service owner and a service cost and a service catalog. And so we're building all that structure out, and then internally we're going to make sure that that we can talk in the language of service. I mean, it's easy to, there is a subtle shift between just offering an IT service, like for example, email, versus offering email as a service. I mean, it sounds the same thing, but it's really not. It's still a service, but at the same time, you are now trying to make sure that that service is well understood, costed well. The customer knows exactly what they're buying, and they can pick from a catalog that's been predefined, and they can either be happy or unhappy with it. But I think that's the kind of level at which you want to offer. Now, if you go beyond pure infrastructure services, as you start getting into, basic services like messaging, then going upstream into services like business services, HR services, HR onboarding, that's a service, or into financial services or business intelligence services. So there's so many other services as you go further up the food chain that the services actually become a hierarchy. So it's not so much that the service by itself, so one service could consume another service, et cetera. So there's a hierarchy of services that have to be built out, and each of them actually have to connect to each other. And the key thing is to make sure that this whole thing doesn't become a big bureaucratic thing that the customers don't understand. So we want to make sure that we build something that is transparent and understandable from a customer so they can consume it. If you make it too complicated, then they don't understand what they're buying anymore, right?
Yep.
So I think it's that delicate balance that we're trying to get to in terms of defining it.
Yeah, so I would add to that. I mean, so what I see happening is you have a bottom-up motion and a top-down motion, and that's kind of where we are, right? So there was, thou shalt consume infrastructure service. Well, what does that really mean? Right? And then as we start trying to understand what that really means from a business standpoint, they're also getting better and more articulate about here's the things that I need, and it's really finding that balance. And ultimately, that's the service paradigm that we're talking about, and that's been what we've been trying to figure out here over the last few years. But it's changing that language, top down and bottom up, and kind of converging in the middle.
Yep.
Yeah.
Job was mentioning some of the challenges, and definitely some of the challenges when you got that 3-layer stack is, getting from the top to the bottom, right? And so one of the things we've done strategically is place our teams in the same locations that Job's teams are in. So where we have major customer bases, we put our team so we can go stand at each other's desk, and sit there and say, fix my problem. But we do have a clear process and structure, but having a good relationship through all 3 layers of the stack, a very open, honest, and transparent relationship is very important.
And as you go up the stack into the application service, it gets a little bit more complicated in explaining what that service is, right?
Right.
Because those services will depend on a lot of other services below that.
That's right.
And so that whole hierarchy has to be well thought through.
Yeah, exactly, because you don't want finger pointing, and that's where, but I think that's one of the things we've actually achieved very well is we don't have that. We have a good team collaborative effort, just like, you may see with the hands-on labs this week. There's multiple teams that collaborate to make that happen. There's the infrastructure team, there's the content team that actually creates the labs, and then there's the knee portal team that actually allows the interface. But all 3 of those teams have to work together because the hands-on labs will either succeed or fail, based on those 3 teams working together smoothly.
Yep. Well, so before we open it up for questions from the audience, I think we have one mic over here. If you want to queue up and ask, unvarnished truth kind of question. Maybe each one of you could just tell a little bit about, what do you know now that you wish you'd known 2 years ago when we kind of started down this private cloud journey and IT as a service. So I don't know, Brian, is there any key learnings that you want to share?
I think one of the big challenges I didn't really expect was, and I should have, but that's hindsight, right? It's just the financial aspect of it all. Because we're a publicly accountable company, and we publish all of our results very transparently. And so when you do that, you try to talk your CFO into buying a lot of hardware that you don't need. You're like, yeah, that way I can be very agile when the need comes in. And you've got all this old hardware, you're going to use this, but it's those conversations that are difficult, and being prepared for that and setting that up earlier as opposed to struggling with it tactically over a year. Strategically facing those kind of challenges, because if you are going to run an internal cloud, you definitely need to have extra capacity because you need to be agile. If you can't be agile, like we mentioned, that instant provisioning, if you can't do that, you can't be successful.
So you're going from a situation where you're buying, in the past, you're buying infrastructure based on funded projects.
Right.
And now you're buying infrastructure based on projected future demand.
Right.
So that's a shift.
Yeah, you have to convince your CFO it's not about buying the servers, it's about we buy them, and then you still get to decide. You still have the control of which team gets these servers or gets that capacity, essentially. So it's still in their control, but they have to be willing to buy without an immediate need to explain.
Okay.
Immediate justification.
Yep. So just moving kind of up the stack on the slide there, Anis, what do you know now that you wish you'd known 2 years ago?
Yeah, it's interesting that he worries about that stuff, and for me, it was more of a marketing issue internally, right? I think we should have been more in front of the messaging, what it is that we're doing, how it fits into the general landscape of the company. We're VMware, so we have all kinds of things going on, and even we had some confusion inside about, well, how does that affect me as a practitioner inside the company to deliver what I need, forget everything else. I think getting in front of that, I think would have been, that's what I advise all of you to do, is get in front of that, or try to articulate that, and then try to find very specific groups within the organization that can become your poster child, so that you can better understand and to kind of do that the bottom down and top up approach and kind of squeeze it so that you can demonstrate value. That's where I wish we would have spent more time in the beginning.
But is there a one cloud newsletter or some kind of regular communication that goes out that just gives a heads up to the folks that want to know kind of what's going on?
Yeah, so we try to expose, what we've been doing is trying to expose what it is that the rest of the company is doing and try to highlight that to create that transparency. But as you can see from the growth charts, this has been a crazy ride, right? And so, we're just trying to just deliver the service, let alone try to market it. And so I'm saying we need to make more concerted effort because we were just trying to stay ahead of the curve.
Yeah.
And
So you're worried we need to sell more?
well, saying be more precise about what we're selling. How's that?
That's good.
That's good. Okay, and Venkat, for you as a consumer of this, what do you wish you'd known before you started?
I see 3 pillars for being successful in this journey, people, process, and technology. And being VMware, we had the right technology and the right people who can provide the technology. We could have spent more time in the people and the process side, so we would have been much more successful. There are a few mistakes we did earlier. Things like, it's just a mindset or the mindset change within IT operations. You always tend to repair stuff. So when you go into cloud and automation, you move away from repairing stuff. You wanted to make sure that you meet your SLA. There is a customer who is waiting for the service. So you redeploy things, redeploy your blueprint so you don't miss your SLA, and then take care of repairing later on. That's one learning we had.
So you're kind of rebuilding things from blueprint instead of trying to fix them.
To fix them, correct. Yeah. That was one thing. And automation and self-service doesn't mean that you skip documentation and training. That's very, very critical to the success. So I would say we didn't do really well initially, but along the way we learned and then repeated the process to make sure people are successful in this journey.
That's interesting. And Joe, you're kind of the forward-looking part of the organization, and the architect and strategy. What have you learned, or what do you know now that you wish had known before we started down this?
Well, I think that the part that I think we are still trying to fine-tune is how do we cost it in a transparent way to the consumer of the service. This is by no means easy to do. So it depends a great deal on how you're structured internally, especially when services are hierarchy. They are basically a hierarchy of services. Your cost is going to be complicated to understand. And I think today we are learning to use our own tool, ITBM, which is our business management tool for IT, which has the ability to try and cost it. So what we've learned is that we need to have a series of tools that have to be connected, at least I'm thinking architecturally, that have to work together in unison to make this work. One is your architecture tool that can actually architect these services. One is the tool where you can actually do your costing of the services, which is in our case we use ITBM for that. And the third one is the tool on which you're actually going to expose your service catalogs. And today we are in the process of doing that on ServiceNow. So I think that ultimately all three have to come together for you to actually be able to understand how the service is set up and how that service is going to be offered and consumed. So I think that there's lots of there are technical challenges that you have to overcome before your services are easily understood by the consumer and they can consume it, and then they are constantly kept up to date on what that service is costing them, what is the SLA of that service, etc. So that's the part that maybe if you go back 2 years, we probably could have done more on that up front as opposed to doing it later in the stage where we are today. So these are just learnings that almost every company goes through. Organizationally, I think Venkat alluded to that. We're doing the same thing. I mean, EMC, a company we work very closely with, have actually gone through a significant reorganization of their IT organizations around the concept of service. We are in the process of doing the same thing, but it's something organizationally you also need to learn, because we all get used to, talking about email as a capability, but we are not all used to talking email as a service, or not just email. Email is probably a simpler one, but financial systems as a service or ERP as a service. But these are things that we have to still fully understand and figure out how to make it work. So.
Yeah, no, that's good. Well, so I want to open the floor to questions from you. Do you have questions about kind of the products we deploy? Anything specific that would help you in your pursuit of IT as a service? Feel free to step up to the mic here. We wanted to make sure we left plenty of time in the session to have a good conversation. So.
Well, I don't know whether this will be a great conversation, but Joe, I appreciate your final comments about cost, right? Mm-hmm. There's no way I could grow the tiny organization I run to the volume of VMs you guys are doing and pay the license fees for the software you guys can use for free inside your environment. Over 30 years ago, most people in this room won't know this, but IBM developed what was called a yellow brick road, all right? And it included all the tasks that were necessary and components that were necessary to manage data centers. And I don't know whether it's really refreshing or not to see five guys on a stage talk about specifically those tasks, all right, that are needed no matter what the software looks behind the scenes and how to run software as a service.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe I can try to answer that. It is true that, in IT, everything just kind of repeats itself for a long period of time. So, so in that context, service is not, we're not inventing the concept of service today. I mean, it's been there for a long time. I think we are fine-tuning it into a grain and an increment that can be finally consumed. I think it's the level and detail at which we're operating and the ease at which you're operating that has changed, but I totally agree with you. I mean, the concept of a service is nothing that we just discovered recently.
It's a landscape. At the end of the day, it's a landscape that is enabling us. No different than how AWS changed the landscape of software development, go-to-market and computer-based stuff. It's the same landscape shift that's now making it more of a reality versus a 5-year charter with millions of dollars of investment. You can do it very cheaply now.
Yeah, and obviously we're a technology company, so that's where always the focus goes, right? They're like, where is my whatever technology and how is it deployed, and as opposed to the people in the process, because it's always kind of an afterthought, just because we're a Silicon Valley company that's very agile.
So next question, please.
So where I assume you guys are is, infinitely further than where a smaller company, 150 person kind of company that I work for is at. And while I'm sure infrastructure as a service and a lot of these concepts are always going to be living and breathing, do you have any suggestions on how to get there? A scenario that we're dealing with right now is that we're small enough that we're in this negative feedback loop. We don't have enough people to get the automation to the point where we need less people, and so we're kind of stuck in this no man's land where our customer, the rest of our company, is pushing and driving, and in fact, in a lot of cases, the ship is leaving the port before we even have a chance to get the dock built. And so we want to get ahead of that and provide them with those features, but we just are always responding to their demands and never being able to actually get to that automated utopian sort of place that we want to. Do you extend more control to them and let you help, or let them help you get there? Like, do you just have any suggestions on how to deal with that middle ground of getting out of the feedback loop and into a better place?
I can try to answer that. I think you're never going to have enough resources. I mean, this is all of our life. I mean, we're sitting here in a larger company and we still don't have enough resources, right? So I think it's really picking your battles. So you can go address this for something that the company deems valuable. So go find that one thing that company deems valuable, that they would love that agility in, and get deep in that and go solve those problems for that. Once you demonstrate the value loop, and that's going to be hard. That's typical startup type stuff, right? It's like, let's work nights, weekends, let's go solve this problem. But once you solve that problem and the rest of the organization will see the value, then they'll start engaging in the conversation of, I want you to do more of that. How do you do that? And I want you to do that for me here. And it just changes the whole nature of the conversation.
I want to add to that too, that you have to pick your battles. I totally agree with Anis. The other thing is you have to be open to the fact that that service that the consumer wants is probably not your best expertise. Maybe you be a broker for that as opposed to providing the service. So you have to make that call. Because if you try to solve all problems, you're certainly not going to be able to do it. In a lot of cases, you may not want to be the service provider. You're just a broker of the service and let somebody else do it. You can do it probably better, faster, cheaper than you can.
Yeah, I think I can give you an example. I mean, the challenge is how do you free up your resources from doing standard, pushing the button kind of work, right? It could be as simple as, just password resets. You won't believe, even in VMware IT, there were human beings or help desk people who were actually resetting passwords on RSA tokens. And that was, at some point we found that was generating over 10,000 tickets to our help desk. Just a simple automation of that freed up so much of time of our resources. And then those resources are deployed to actually build other automation because they are the ones best know, what is their daily pain point, and then use those skill sets to build additional automation. That's where we approached our journey.
Another question?
So one of the challenges that we had when we first started with virtualization was the concept of VM sprawl, right? We all of a sudden generated a ton more machines. we feel like we've kind of got our hands around that now to some degree. But as we talk about moving to IT as a service, specifically with the infrastructure and the hockey stick effect you saw with the VMs that were being spun up, what are you doing within VMware to provide the controls around that to make sure that you have some concept of what's coming and managing it? Because obviously, beyond just even the VMware licensing perspective, when you get into all the other things that apply to infrastructure, security, and antivirus, and all the things that go onto a machine when it's first built, your costs could spiral very quickly.
Just talking about content sprawl? You're talking about content sprawl for the most part?
VM sprawl.
Well,
VM sprawl?
Well, I don't really think, I mean, that kind of falls to you because, you know, he specs it, he negotiates it, I build it and deliver it. So
You don't care if it's sprawl or not, right?
exactly. So yeah, and you
Yeah,
should
so
kind
we've
of
had that
our-
issue. So
our
one
gauge.
of the things that we do for our lines of business is, you know, so we have this large capacity container for a line of business to consume, right? At the end of the day, it's very costly, and our job is to make them understand how they're consuming it. Is it generating value for that line of business, right?
Yeah.
And so so my team actually embarked on a lot of, I would say, kind of reporting that we've done to try to articulate what it is that's running, who's using it, how are they consuming it. And so I view that as content, so you can call it VMs. For me, it's all content in the cloud. And so a lot of it was creating that level of metrics and kind of business intelligence related to that. For instance, you know, little simple tools that we did, like, you know, a hotness ranking of, you know, here's the top rated, not top rated, but the top deployed amount of content. You know, how many are being deployed in what time frame? Who are the people that even generated that content to begin with, right? And then you can start actually having a discussion around how to optimize that. And one thing that we did learn early on was that, you know, in our journey was at some point in our company there's probably 500, you know, maybe 5 people to 100 people going and building the same content, the same VM structure or VApp at any one time. They just didn't know about each other. And so we start creating kind of people process frameworks that just get people to talk, you know, and start understanding, you know, who you are so that, hey, maybe we can join forces and go build this instead of, you know, these 20 different groups building the same thing. And so we did things like that on the people process side and the reporting side just to create transparency.
So let me give you a parallel to the past. One of my past jobs, I used to manage a large Lotus environment. The same thing. Anytime this is the dark side of self-service. You know the answer. This is the dark side of self-service, right?
Yeah.
Once you make the thing very easy to consume, people will consume it for doing a lot of useless stuff. You know, and before we knew, we had 8,000 Lotus applications because it was so easy to build one. Now, we have the same problem with SharePoint. So this problem is not just a VM sprawl problem.
Yeah.
This problem is a governance issue on anything that you make easy to consume.
That's right.
And so I think you got to build a structure to handle it.
So sunlight is a disinfectant, right? So you're saying just show visibility to the
Yeah,
the
make it transparent
funder
and
what they're
visible.
spending the money on.
Yeah, and the question that we always ask is, how can I make sure that you're getting the most value out of your investment, right? That's the question that when I sit down with the people that consume those particular containers, I'm trying to answer for them, providing the data so they can make decisions.
Yeah.
And if you can answer that question, I think it'll kind of move you that one step
Yeah.
forward. Yeah.
And many other tools.
Well, and many other tools. Yeah.
Among other things.
Among other tools.
Yeah.
We see, look at VC Ops as like a single pane. but
Yeah.
Behind that could be other tools.
Well, and I know Anis and his team actually meets like what, quarterly or even more frequently with each major tenant and reviews.
That's
Here's
right.
your usage, here's all your reports, let's talk about this, why is this cold, why is this hot, and then planning for the next coming
Yep.
quarter. So I can, you know, budget
And then
appropriately.
identifying those key lines of business, just getting them together as a forum to even talk about what they're doing together so they can exchange ideas and all of that. And we found that that was immensely useful.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
bringing all the different groups together and being this conduit for that forum was immensely useful and productive in our organization.
And every quarter you also send us a bill.
We do that too, yes.
So let's have one last question here, and then you know, don't forget to give us feedback. It's how we know whether we're doing the right thing to address your questions. So I think it's on the event app, but
Yeah.
please give us kind of candid feedback on our presentation. So go ahead.
All right. Mine pertains to everyone's talking about the cloud and having your own internal cloud, a hyper cloud, you know, and extending it out to the, you know, Google, you know, whoever's cloud out there. My biggest challenge is the bandwidth to the cloud. You guys all work in places that you can probably purchase as much bandwidth as you ever want. You know, you're in San Francisco or Tokyo or wherever in the world, my organization has sites sitting in little towns out in North Dakota that didn't even have a town. You know, but they all want this service. Do you guys face those same challenges to the extent that we do? You know, because I look at it from my side, the small company, and that guy sitting out there in North Dakota wants the same feel as the guy in Minneapolis or St. Paul where I work. It's a challenge to be able to give them that same amount of service and level of service.
So they want 5 nines service with 3 nines network and 2 nines power. Yeah.
Right, you know, and it's out there. I mean, they're lucky to have power at
But that's an expectation setting problem, right? You need to set the right expectations. But so part of the providing the service also is to define what level of service you can actually provide as from an SLA perspective. So if somebody's sitting in a prairie in North Dakota trying to access something with the same kind of performance as somebody who's sitting right next to the data center in Palo Alto, I think that's apples to oranges.
Develop things for the mass company in terms of consumption, and then that 20% or 10% that's out there, then it forces us to start moving up that food chain and getting creative with them. Because there's other solutions you can layer on top of that to try to solve, some of your latency problems or that, or you can re-architect kind of the thing that's being consumed so that it can be more lightweight from a bandwidth standpoint. And we've done some of that depending on the need.
Yeah.
But I think, localization and just, we mentioned, pure laws of physics that we can't get past happen to us, right? So, for instance, we run these V forums and everything with VMworld, and we do these hands-on labs, and we try to get the same experience, these little events in Kuala Lumpur, as we do, someone sitting here in the Moscone Center, right? So, so we built a data center in Singapore to be, close to them, because like a lot of links from Australia, for instance, where we have a lot of, people, and it's a big important site, goes to the U.S., then back to, Singapore or something, right? And there's a lot of crazy things like that we have to deal with, which are similar to your issue. And so I think actually like vCloud Air and those types of providers could really help you if you could put a small instantiation regionally close to where they are. So you don't have to buy a full data center where you're, purchasing racks and racks of gear. You can buy a small slice to hopefully serve that small population you've got in a distant location.
I'll do a shameless product plug. We use Vue fairly heavily to solve that kind of type problem in terms of low latency environment.
Yeah.
So before we get the hook here, so I just want to thank you guys for sharing your insights about the work you're doing, and thanks everybody for your attendance today, and have a great VMworld for the rest of the conference.
Thanks. Thank you.